Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to take a moment and maybe share where you're calling in from today, we always like to kind of see, we get people from all over the world, so it's always kind of exciting. And I am just going to jump into it because I know that we have a full conversation today, and I want to make sure that I don't take away any of it. So my name is Dara Cosberg. I am the program director at Reimagine. And I produce this show with Claire Bidwell Smith, your host today. And she will be joined by Dr. Gloria Thomas Anderson and Tracee Holloway. And for those who are unfamiliar with Reimagine, we're a nonprofit organization that sparks community experiences like this one that empower individuals, families, communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including serious illness and death. And we also try to inspire people in celebrating life and one another. So, and I'm just seeing we've got we have people from all different places. That's wonderful. And then, sorry, I'm just gonna flip. Oops. Before we get started, I just wanted to express our profound gratitude for Reimagine's 2021 sponsors who helped make this work possible. I also want to thank anyone who has individually donated to Reimagine, as that enables us to have free events like this. And I know that you all are familiar with Zoom, most likely. I just want to call out a few things that I do have the live transcription enabled. You can click CC at the bottom to see the transcription. If you are finding the chat disruptive, you can always just close it on the top right-hand corner. But we do invite you to put questions and comments throughout the session. Claire always reserves about at least the last 20 minutes to respond to questions. And with that, I'm going to introduce Claire, who has been hosting this series for over a year now. We're deep into that.
Started in like April of the pandemic.
Yes. And she is, I don't know how many shows you've maybe, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's at least like 30 or 40. And we took a little hiatus, and I'm just so happy that she's back. And just for those who aren't unfamiliar, Claire is a therapist who specializes in grief, and she's the author of 3 books of nonfiction: The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief, all of which I can highly recommend. With that, Claire, I'm passing it off to you.
Thank you so much, Dara. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be back doing this. We have taken a little hiatus. I started having these conversations with the amazing platform and organization Reimagine shortly after the pandemic happened, and just wanting to hold space for all these huge questions and feelings and anxieties we were having, really confronting and facing death and end of life suddenly without being prepared for it. Not that we're ever prepared, but the pandemic was its own experience. So I'm so excited to come back today and this month with these 2 amazing women. Dr. Gloria Thomas Anderson brings a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and experience to the healthcare, education, and faith-centered arenas. She's a university-level professor, licensed social worker, author, minister, and advanced care planning expert with a passion for life. She holds an interdisciplinary PhD in curriculum and instruction and educational leadership, policy, and foundations. Her research focuses on healthcare, equity, spirituality, and culturally responsive care at the end of life. Tracee T. Holloway is a value-driven professional of many hats. She has managed publications and conducted PR and communication campaigns for small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. She's edited, proofread, and ghostwritten books and other content for authors and C-level executives. And she serves in initiatives to address advanced care planning healthcare disparities in the Black community. Welcome, Tracee and Gloria. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Claire.
You're welcome. So obviously we just heard a lot about what you guys are doing, but I would love for you to start, each of you telling us how you got into this field in this realm. And your mother-daughter, correct?
Yes, we are.
I love that.
Dara, this is just a backstory. Tracee and I do work together. She's been working with me a lot, but her work helps me so much. And Dara, we were on a call one day and she accidentally called me mom and something. And she said, "Oh, that's your daughter." And I said, "Yeah." So anyway, this is, wonderful that we get a chance to do this. So the way that I started getting into this particular work around advanced care planning was basically when I was in my master's program. This was my topic, my thesis topic was African Americans and end of life. Mm-hmm. And I chose that because at the time I was an intern at the Veterans Hospital working with, patients basically in dialysis. And the push came from the hospital to get people to do advanced directives. And when I was talking with some of the Black vets there, they were saying they wouldn't do that and they didn't trust the system. That was eye-opening for me because I wasn't in that field at first, but I started doing my research around that and found that the literature supported their feelings of mistrust, that they felt that why would anybody care about them if they are dying, if they're not caring about them when they are living. And so my work began from that research into me writing a book called The African American Spiritual and Ethical Guide to End of Life Care, What Y'all Gonna Do With Me? Mm. And that became a resource, a patient resource for families, for Black patients and caregivers to have an actual a booklet that they could refer to kind of become more informed for their own healthcare decision makings, particularly with serious illness and end of life.
Amazing. I'm so grateful that you're doing this work. Tracee, how about you?
I started working with my mother in high school, actually. She's always been a very prolific writer and just, poetic. She started her literary arts ministry, Heart Tones, when I was very young. It's 35 years old now, that Heart Tones ministry, and it has evolved so much. But when I was in high school, I remember working with her on a book that she was publishing. It was the first poem book, and what was it called? One Step at a Time. I forgot the name of it, but I remember working with her on this book and then other things from there, her greeting cards. And I've always just loved working with my mom on different projects that she's a part of. And now, after college and using my own gifts, I started my own business and just being able to help her with my skills and work with her in this capacity has just been really awesome to do. So we work together very well. And I also am an advocate for the same kind of things that she's an advocate for. And I think just having her direction and wisdom has really enlightened me as well. So
that's amazing to hear. It makes me kind of teary. I have two daughters and they are just like, oh God, mom's talking about death and grief again. And I hope one day instead they will have more of an understanding of what it is I do and appreciation for it. So you give me hope, Tracee.
Well, good. That's good. It's kind of interesting though, right? Because it's not really a topic that people want to talk about. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what makes it so much more important to actually just, bridge that gap and say, okay, let's talk about it. And actually, that's one of the subheadings in the title of her book is Let's Talk About It. Mm-hmm. And when we don't talk about, the the things that come up for death and dying and critical illness and emergency health care, it can create so many problems with families, and there can be chaotic moments. And I think a lot of that can be avoided if we do, just have those conversations before we need to know the answers.
Absolutely. And that leads me into my first question really is like, this is what happened when the pandemic hit. We were all so ill prepared. Most of the people in at least this country had not been having these conversations, did not have any kind of advanced care planning, did not know, all kinds of things going into this very serious experience of the pandemic. And, I think that there have been so many incredible things that have come from it, good things, because it's illuminated so much. I have never talked more about death and dying, and I've been talking about it for over a decade, but finally people want to talk about it and want to think about it and want to be more prepared and understand it more. And so I'm curious what you have seen, Dr. Gloria and Tracee, about how the pandemic has shifted our awareness around death and dying and end of life planning.
Well, you're right. That was such an imposition in a way on our lives. We were just strapped with it. We couldn't do anything about it. And to see the death rate being so high so quickly was traumatic for a lot of people, including myself. And seeing the losses from people and their families. I know that one young lady called me because I don't do grief counseling per se, but I do work around that and inspirational work and encouragement and prayer. And someone called me and had lost 25 members of her family and friends in a particular area that was highly concentrated. And she was asking for prayer. And what do you say, to someone who's had that type of loss in within a couple of 2 or 3 months? So it was horrendous, the feeling of death and dying all around, but it did also impact people to the point where they like, oh, this could happen to me, because we didn't know what was causing it at first. No one knew. So the fear factor was there, and then all of the misinformation and all of that kind of clouded that and caused even more deaths as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But yeah, it was a hard time. And with Black people, dying too, with only being 13% of the US population, 12 to 13%, with the highest death rate all over the nation, dying 3 times the rate of other groups. And so that was very alarming as well. So it was really, and yeah, that's my.
Yeah.
Right, it was.
But it's brought so much to light that we need to be looking at and talking about. And I think people are getting that now. Tracee, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree. It did. It brought it to light what some of the issues were that were kind of being, muddled over or ignored even. And you just couldn't ignore it. The death rates were speaking for themselves. It just kind of highlighted what some of the issues were that we needed to address. And there were a few things, of course, that happened in 2020 that kind of brought it all to a head, and enabled us to not only have the discussion about, death and dying and being prepared for that decision, but also just enabled us as a country to begin a wider conversation about racial injustices and the backdrop for why we have such issues as we do today. So I think it was just a really interesting combination of things that just happened, at the onset of this pandemic.
Absolutely. The racial disparity in healthcare and end-of-life care was really illuminated in the last year, which I'm so grateful for. It was always there, but we just weren't seeing it so upfront, and we weren't talking about it at all. And so I'd love to turn back to that with you, Dr. Gloria, because you were saying that that's kind of your early research and what you got into. It reminded me of of thinking about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in the 60s when she was in her hospital in Chicago, and just she was really noticing the experience of dying patients in this way that the physicians around her weren't noticing. They were looking at them as symptoms and as illnesses, but they weren't really looking at the experience of the dying patients. And she was such a pioneer in that. And it sounds like you've really done some pioneering work around, how people of color feel with healthcare and end of life care. So I'd
Oh,
just love to hear like everything about that.
oh gosh. Well, we could stay on this call and not go anywhere else if we talk about disparities in healthcare, as well as disparities in society in large. We have so much of the racism and discrimination impacting people of color. But yeah, for me, I noticed that one of the issues is in our community that I think it caused more problems for us was the misinformation and the misconceptions and the myths around those things. I really do. And then, there were many articles out there too that were pointing to some of those same issues. It's really dear to my heart because when I think back to my own life, I didn't share this earlier, but I had a sudden life-threatening illness too. And I was healthy, doing well. And all of a sudden, I was misdiagnosed and I had a life-threatening illness that resulted in a near-death experience. And that has empowered me too, to want to help reduce the disparities in our community. Because I noticed during that season, like what happened with me happens so often where people are not prepared. They don't know that even healthcare providers have their own baggage, if you will, some of them, and bring that to the table with myths such as Black people can take more pain than white people, which and even one study showed where medical students believed that. About 40% of them. So until we can break through some of these myths and misinformation and things that don't allow miscommunication, we have to get through that. And I think by the pandemic and the systemic racism becoming more of a topic that we can talk about, and people are more willing to talk about it, which is a great thing. But policies have to be changed, and it's at the institutional, the structural level that's going to take this to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracee, you want to add anything on those thoughts?
That's pretty much where we are on it. One of the things that I realized too in the beginning, with this not being an area that I've personally researched and all, I fall between the, knowledgeable and unknowledgeable area, I guess, of people. And so I was subjected to a lot of that misinformation as well, on Facebook and different messages that went through. And, it was a really hard time to find out where the truth was and where could we, get credible information about what was going on. I think overall people were just scared with the unknowns. And in our lives, we all have so many things that are unknown already. To add on top of that, an invisible killer that is silent and deadly, and that prevents you from connecting with your loved ones or doing regular activities such as going to the grocery store and seeing your loved ones. It was just a really challenging moment. And I think now looking back on it, we've come a long way as far as where we are with getting credible information, having accurate, factual, scientific information to kind of back things up. And we've just made a lot of progress. So, yeah. And I know there's more to come.
No, I know now we're dealing with the vaccine, and more misinformation and mistrust and, so much. So thinking about racial disparity, have you seen a change since you began researching it in healthcare and end of life? And have you also seen any change since the pandemic and us talking about it more? Or are we still kind of in the same place where we always were?
Well, from the articles that I've read recently, we're not there yet. You know, I think the awareness is there that people are more willing to acknowledge, you know, those implicit and explicit the biases that they have about people who are different from themselves. I think those conversations are happening a lot more. But again, the issue is deeper than just having conversation, right?
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
so much deeper. It's structurally imposed. It's structured in the way we live life here in the U.S. And until we can get things changed at that root level, we can complain. We can, you know, have walkouts. We can do all kinds of things to show that we don't agree with what is. But in the long run, until we get something changed at that root level, we won't be able to see the progress that so many people want to see.
Right.
You know,
I picture it in my head like the root level is the center with all these spokes, and all these spokes have to change: policy, healthcare, individual, community. You know, there's so many aspects that need to be changing all together in order to get to the middle.
yes,
And so,
right.
yeah, that's a lot. And so what did you find? Like, were you able to make changes in the work you were doing at the VA, or with the veterans? Were you able to actually start making just like ground level changes?
Well, basically, what they helped me do is do the research. They pointed me to that direction because I wanted to, their voices were important to hear. And what it has done is it geared me to how can I help with the skills I have with being a social worker, you know, being a professor. What can I do to help my community, basically, in this area? One of the things I read recently, the statistics on the completion of advanced care directives by African Americans, about 19%. 19% nationally, as compared to 72% of whites.
Wow.
And so the disparity thing there has a lot of factors there, not just the mistrust, but there's so many other factors where people don't know information. That's another issue that we found, that people are wanting to know these things, but if you don't have conversations and your doctors or medical people aren't talking to you about those, or offering these services to you with explanation of what they are, what benefits they are for the caregiver, for the family, for the patient, then they won't take advantage of it. So then that person-centered care that we want to provide, we're not providing it for everyone because of that. And so information is important, getting the right information, sources that you trust, that you know that where you're going to get information related to something pertaining to your healthcare or your family's healthcare, that you can say, oh, I know this is valid.
Right.
That's really key. But yeah, when I work with the veterans, they really share their stories with me, and it, you know, it's heartbreaking to hear some of those stories, to be very honest. But they did not, those that I was working with, they chose not to do that. But by me working and writing the book and creating a resource that was credible, that was from a Black person to my community, that has been a way for people to have those conversations. It encourages people to have the conversation. And over the last 15 years, it's in its 9th edition now. It's on the CDC recommended a list for resources as well. So I'm, you know, really grateful that I was able to take their stories and then build from that. And hopefully it's made a difference in other people's lives to this point.
It sounds like it has. Well, let's talk about advanced care planning in general, because you both are really versed in that. But I mean, I'm surprised to hear that there's 70% of white people who've done it. Like I find so much resistance to it. People are scared to do it. It's very emotional. And often people aren't doing it until it's, you know, down to the wire. And so where do we start? When should we be doing advanced care planning? Like at what point, where should we start and where can we be learning about it when we're not in a critical stage?
That's the challenge, because who wants to look at death and dying? Who wants to face that?
Besides Claire.
Well, the mortality, looking at your own mortality is not something easy to do.
No,
But
I know.
we know that we will leave here. And during the pandemic, we saw such widespread death that it was so common, it became so common that people really started to look at themselves and say, this could happen to me.
Mhm.
And so the way I approach having those conversations or encouraging people is to just ask the question, what would you want done if you weren't able to speak for yourself, due to a life-threatening illness or accident? And asking a family member that, and are saying, what I would want done. And I know there's resistance in that too. I talk with a lot of people, and that is the challenge, is getting family members to want to talk about it. Parents don't want to talk about it with their children, and children don't want to talk about it about their parents. But it can happen at any age. Death is not just relegated to people that are getting older. It can happen at any point. And so having those conversations, one of the goals that I have with the Let's Talk About ACP program that I've created, it's a training program, a train the trainer for churches and organizations to actually become facilitators of the program that I've created so that they can normalize this. We need to normalize this and make that a part of our lives, just like we have other ministries, health and wellness, and choir and things like that with the faith-based environments. We can help more people if we have these type of talks safely in a place where we know that we can say and ask questions and get credible information. Then we're equipped and we're empowered to make a decision about those things. Because what I found is when people don't have this conversation, I've seen families, and this is firsthand at over 15 years, I've seen family members not speak to each other anymore. Blame the death on another family member for making a decision when they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what the person's wishes were, especially with accidents that can happen, and life happens. We can't control that. We don't know when we're going to leave here, but to love enough to talk with the people that matter to you, so that when something does, or if something does, if it doesn't, wonderful, but having them know what your wishes are if you can't speak for yourself, and having that documented is a valuable peace saver for family, for relationships, and also for the ones that are left behind.
Yeah, it's a gift for them, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
is such a gift to your loved ones to do this work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Tracee,
I
what do you think?
definitely agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a hard conversation to have, and one that people are reluctant to start. But I think the earlier you start that conversation, the better. I, as early as, early childhood, 4 or 5 years old, because, my grandmother passed about 3 years ago, my mom's mom. And it was a really tough time. My children were all there. We were in the hospice room and we were present. So we needed to have that conversation, with them, how to process that, how to process this loss, that this is not a temporary situation, that, grandmother has transitioned. And I think if we start those conversations super early and get kids kind of used to the conversation, it will help us, have families that can talk about it the older they get, and just kind of normalize the conversation about transitioning from life to death as early as possible. There's ways that probably can be to do that. I'm not a therapist. I don't have that training, but I used to run a daycare, and I used to be a director for childcare. So I have some knowledge on what children can take. And I believe that that if we start that conversation early with them, it'll help prepare them to be emotionally well as well when they're dealing with an ill family member that might be close to them, or, you know, in their teen years, and maybe they lose a friend at a young age, or another loved one, or maybe they fall ill with something. I think it starts young. And of course, we know death doesn't only happen to seniors who are aging. It happens all the time. I lost a cousin a couple of years ago, and he was in his prime age, in his 30s, and it was unexpected. So I think rather than us as a collective having this idea of death only being something we talk about in the hospital rooms while we're pressed with that issue, I think it's best, you know, we do kind of bridge that conversation, start it early, have a conversation over, you know, even celebrity deaths that happen. That brought on a big conversation on social media. I noticed when there were several celebrities who were passing away from COVID-19 or different other illnesses in the last year. And the conversation, as you said earlier, Claire, is just opening up. People are more willing to discuss it. So I think if we use any opportunity that comes to us as a way in to just start the conversation, do that, you know, use a celebrity's death and talk about it. Use the fact that, you know, maybe you know someone who wasn't prepared, and let's talk about that. What can we do to be prepared for this? What if we had to make the same type of decision? What would you want to do? And then just have that conversation. And then for some people, it might be, I don't want to talk about this for a long period of time. Let's just, you know, let's talk about it later. That's fine. Always find a good moment in time where you are, you know, kind of in a good headspace to have the conversation, but go ahead and talk about it. You know, set aside the time to just have a talk. Let's talk about it, you know. And believe me, once you do actually start the conversation, it becomes so much easier to do it.
It does. I feel like it
does.
relieves anxiety
It does.
around death and dying. But I think, you know, what I see is a lot of superstition almost around it. My friend Alua Arthur, who's a death doula, she has this great quote that she says, talking about sex won't get you pregnant, and talking about death won't make you dead. People have this idea, like if they start doing this planning, they're going to set something in motion, which isn't true at all.
That is true. That is true. There is a taboo surrounding that superstition, and I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but it's there and it's prevalent. And I think it's you know, a part of. I remember when I was younger, I would hear kind of the older people in the church say things like, "Well, we don't want to speak that into existence. You know, you don't want to speak that and then create that happening." I think a lot of people are there. And I think what we have to do is just continue to have the conversation and continue to just normalize it. And then they will see, you know, for themselves that just talking about it, you know, doesn't actually bring it on. Just as your friend said, I love that quote, by the way, you know, talking about sex doesn't make you pregnant. So it's the same, you know, kind of thing. It's hard to do, but once you do it, it becomes easier. And then the result of it is less stress, less chaos for your family, and awareness. And there's just a comfort that comes from knowing what someone wants when they are passing on.
Well, I have a two-part question, and then I really want to open it up to all these wonderful audience members who are joining us today. But so what's the range of advanced care planning? Like, I mean, there's end of life planning. There's things from, you know, DNRs, do not resuscitate, all the way to, you know, what you want to happen to your jewelry. What's the range? And then the second part is, what are some like really simple things you can get started doing if you have nothing so far? Where do you start?
The range is vast, right? So every aspect of our lives is something that we want to touch and make plans for in the event of our demise or our death, right? So you have, you know, your property and goods, your home insurance, different things you can do with that. anything, your businesses, and then of course your healthcare decision making. It's a very vast topic of ACP, and it's not just healthcare decision making, which is where Dr. Gloria and I focus on the healthcare decision making. So it will require, I think, for people to consider all of their options. You know, what do we want done with the house? Who do we want to leave the cars and the jewelry to? All of these things that can't go with you on the other side. You have to make arrangements for that. Your children, you know, who's the guardian that will take over in the event that both parents are lost? It's not a conversation we want to have. But I think if we just look at it from a whole life perspective, then you start to really see what areas of ACP need to be addressed. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
And so when you ask about the vastness of advanced care planning, we do focus primarily on the healthcare decision-making part, and that would be the DNR, what those functions are, what emergency services would you want if you weren't able to speak for yourself, would you want CPR, and explaining those kinds of things. And then also choosing someone to be your healthcare advocate, your proxy, because having the right person and that they know that's really important too. I had a situation once where I was speaking for a group, and a man came up to me and said, you know, he had tears in his eyes because his brother was in the hospital, unable to speak for himself. And he had been appointed, he had put him as his healthcare advocate. And he said he would wish he had known that, because he wouldn't want that. He felt their sister would have been better to make those decisions. And so I realized then that, yeah, you can pick somebody, but they need to know about it too, and agree to be able to speak up for you, be able to converse with the medical team, and not argue, but to make sure that your care is exactly the way you want it to be. And if you can't speak for yourself, you need someone who's not afraid to take that role and to do it. We go back to my mom. When my mom, years ago, when I wrote the book, the first issue, her face is on the cover. And so when I went to Texas and I showed her the book, and she was like, "What y'all gonna do with me?" And she was reading it, and then she looked at me and she said, "Well, what y'all gonna do with me?" And, you know, we had never had that conversation. Yeah. This was back in 2006. And I said, "Well, Mom, what do you want us to do?" And she started telling, "I don't want all those machines cooked up to me. I don't want this, that, and the other." And I said, "Well, let's just complete your advance directive." And we did. And at that time, and so she told me everything that she wanted. She wasn't sick, but about a year, the next year, she had a brain aneurysm. And she came through it, but she wasn't able to speak for herself during a period of that time. It gave us comfort knowing that we had something in hand that would honor her wishes. Yeah. And so fast forward in 2018, she was sick, and we knew that it was close to the end for her. And I asked her before she was unable to start, talk again. I said, "Mom," I said, what are your wishes? What do you want us to do?" And she told us the same thing. So we updated everything right there, and they notarized everything. Within a couple of weeks, she wasn't able to talk anymore, but we honored it. And because we honored what my mom wanted, family members who we don't always agree, we love each other, but we don't all see things the same, but we were able to all come to agreement. Not because you want it this way, you want it that way, but because Mom wanted it this way, and that's what we're gonna do. And so we all were there with her. We were present when she transitioned. I was actually saying a prayer over her, but her whole family was around her, the grandchildren, the children, all of us were there. And I know for my mom, that was the best gift to her leaving here, because she loved family. That's all she ever did, was cook all these good meals, and she was a soul food cook and from scratch on everything. And so people love my mom's cooking, and she was a hairstylist. She had her own business. My mom was very, very just a beautiful spirit. And for her to leave this earth surrounded with love like that, not connected to machines in a hospital ICU, that is so impersonal. And on that note, many African Americans, the literature reflects that too often we do wind up in those situations, and that is not honoring someone if there's, palliative care options are not addressed or given, hospice options, or you don't know about it. So what I believe that my work is, the important part of it is to make that information culturally relevant, make it where it's safe and that it's credible, and that people will be encouraged to say, okay, now I'm prepared. I know what I need. I know what I need to ask about, and to change that scenario from dying in a hospital wards, when you could die peacefully at home or in any other place where you choose.
Right.
Wow, thank you. Do you want to add something, Tracee?
I do. And you asked also about just how to start the or how to start that process. Like, what's the easy way to kind of start the process? I think the starting point will vary for different people. Some people may find it easy to start that process right in the middle of someone else's death and dying situation. They might say, now's the time. Let's start it. What forms do I need? How do I do this? Because I don't want to have this happen to me. Some people might, need to be led through the conversation and maybe contact or schedule an appointment with someone like their medical professional and have a one-on-one and say, okay, explain to me in detail, what does this mean? And have that. The process will vary, but the point of it is there's really kind of 3 key steps that need to happen in order to take care of your ACP, your advanced directive decision making. And that's one, first of all, just decide what it is that you would want to happen during your healthcare situation, emergency situation. Making a decision on the DNR, the DNI, full code, what kind of medical decisions do you want? And then documenting those decisions on the form that is relevant for your state or where you are, and having that officially, made legal. In some states it requires 2 witnesses, in other states it might be 2 witnesses and a notary, or just a notary. And then there are other states that don't have those requirements. So finding out what it takes for your state to make your wishes official. So deciding what you want, making it official by documenting that according to what your state's process is, and then sharing that with your healthcare advocate and your medical professionals, your team. And then it can be in any order. Maybe you have the conversation first with your family and say, oh, well, I'm thinking about this, and any order, but those are the 3 main steps to do. And it's a lot easier when you just think of it in 3s, make a decision, document the decision, share the decision.
That's perfect. Thank you. Is this, now I know you do the Let's Talk About ACP workshops. Can you tell us about that? And is that what you do in those, kind of get people started?
Yes, it is actually for the Let's Talk About ACP workshops. It's based on Dr. Gloria's book, the African American Spiritual and Ethical Guide to End of Life Care. And so she developed this wonderful program that walks people through the conversation. It walks them through the vocabulary that's used on those documents for the advanced directives. It walks them through the jargon, the medical jargon that can often trip people up, and they're, may not understand, well, what does this mean really? So we break that down as well. It does come from a faith-based perspective in our workshop, because it's dealing with the faith-based aspect of the African American culture. And there's statistics that show that most African Americans have a faith, a place with faith, in their belief system. And so it deals with the faith-based structure there. It also addresses the historical considerations that impact our decision making today, or our disparities that we face. And it just addresses those three key things: the historical aspect, the spiritual aspect, and of course the generational kind of aspect or cultural aspect of the decision-making process. And so by the end of the workshops, we have walked people through all of that. And, they feel empowered to make those decisions now and to, take their ACP forms, complete those, share that information with their families. And it's been going really well. And we're, hoping to continue with what we're doing with that and continue to bless people and help people through those decisions. We're actually partnered too with another group. And so in November, for National Hospice and Palliative Care Month, we're launching an initiative called ACP for AA. And it's Advanced Care Planning for African Americans, just so we can help further the progress on getting African Americans and the Black community to have these conversations and address that disparity. That's,
So great.
so huge. So
Yeah, that's so great. Well, thank you guys. I want to acknowledge that Oceana, who's an amazing death doula, has reminded me or pointed out that Elua, that I misattributed that quote to Elua. I've heard Elua say it, but Oceana says that it's from someone named Gail Rubin. So I want to make sure we all hear that. And then Oceana, I wanted to invite you on if you want to come on video and ask your question to Gloria and Tracee. I'd love to see your face. I haven't seen you in a little while. Are you still here with us? Maybe she's not with us.
Hi, I'm here, but I'm on my phone now.
No problem. Hi.
Hi. So, hey Claire, it's good to
Hi,
see you
good to
again.
see you too.
Yeah. So my question was to these amazing people. This is, a question I am wrestling with myself. Is what do you see are some of the challenges? And then what would be the solutions for Black folks confronting grief? So often in the death cafes that I hold, I hear people expressing the context in which they're grieving not being supportive. So maybe that's really actually my question is, how do Black folks grieve in contexts where they're being gaslit or not supported by their own folks?
That's a tough one.
That is.
Yeah, it is. I'll let you take that, Dr. Gloria.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
I know, right?
Okay, when you say not supported, do you mean like family members not supporting someone after the death? Give me a little bit more about.
Yeah, no, happy to do so. What I mean is, you know how it is. Somebody dies and you get your 3 days, maybe a week of folks going, oh, and after that, they don't want to talk to you about it anymore. They wonder why you haven't moved on. This culture we have around, this strong, I'm not even going to call it resilience because it's not that, but this like needing to be strong and armored to make it in the world. How do we confront that mechanism from internalized racism to actually heal ourselves and to be with our grief? If you guys confronted that,
I feel you so much.
Right.
And I love that question. And just in a short way to say that I know that I have friends that have lost loved ones, and I have two, of course. And when people kind of get over it quicker than you, it's like, okay, but that's done. I mean, you buried him, you did this. People still grieve. The grieving is very individualized. I believe that you have to really, I think we have to make a real effort to not forget, and not to, just because it wasn't hard for us, but be mindful and empathetic to the person that is still experiencing that grief, even if it's a year or two later. And that happens. One of my best friends lost her daughter suddenly, and she was only 40 years old. And the grief for that family was, I did a podcast for CTAC on that, their Heart and Health podcast. I talked about the grief process and how we can't say what's right for someone else. but we need to support them, and that may take a little bit more of us letting go of whatever the norms are, and embracing that, because if you care about someone, you want to be there for them, you want to support them, and you need to help them talk about it too. Talking about the person that died is healing a lot of times for that person who is left behind. They need you not to forget, or just to not to ignore them. Know that that person still matters to them. And sometimes we just have to tell people outright, I'm still hurting. I still feel this pain. And I really would appreciate if you would support me in this. We have to let our voices be heard in that too, and not be silent about it, because it is an issue that happens, and unfortunately it happens in all groups, where people say, well, that happened, he died already. No, that person still means something to you always. And so it's sensitive to that.
I think that's a great way to do it too, is speaking up for yourself and saying, I am still experiencing this. This still is very hitting me very sensitively right now. And then also just, as a collective solution, just continuing to offer spaces like this, or, I've seen other spaces where it's okay to talk about grief, and finding support where the support is normalized. And, so sometimes that may not look like your usual support structure if you're not receiving the encouragement to continue your grief process in your way. Then maybe you have to seek out a safe space where you can grieve as a collective group amongst people who understand and support that process. And then it's my hope that we'll continue to broaden this conversation, so that we don't have to look for small groups of, grieving groups, but that it becomes a conversation that we can have as a wider collective, to talk about with that support structure in place on a wider level. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. And then, I read something, I can't remember where it was, but Black people are up against so much already that we tend to put on a strong front a lot of times anyway. And our strength has always kind of helped us persevere, just culturally, generationally, all the things that we've gone through. And so when we experience death, it's almost like this unspoken vibe or energy that comes that says, okay, you should be strong again by now. And that's just not the case in a lot of times, and so I think, just as people, we have to look beyond this, I say stereotype, but look beyond that aspect of we're supposed to be strong, we've endured so much, and allow each other the space to grieve, allow each other the space to grieve, not only just, the death of a loved one, but, jobs,
any
career grief, racial experiences, and just grieving the loss of independence and freedom to just be who you are in your own skin. There's a lot of grieving that we can, help each other with collectively, that I think it just requires some empathy. And it requires some time, and just giving people space and time and empathy, and supporting them that way.
God, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Such incredible advice, so many resources and practical tools. And I'm so appreciative. We've somehow already come to our hour close, and we got to one question. So how can people find you if they have more questions, they want to take your workshops? I think Dara's been putting things in the chat. What's the best way to keep up with the both of you?
Well, Dr. Gloria and I are both on Instagram. I'm at Instagram at The Way Up CEO, and she's at Instagram at Dr. Gloria Thomas Anderson. And also the websites are a great way to get information. Heart Tones, which is her 35-year-old ministry, is at hearttones.com. The book and workshops are at eolacp.org. And our new initiative for ACP for AA will be at a website all its own at acpforaa.org, and that launches officially in November.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for the work you're doing and for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, such a pleasure. We might have to have a part 2 because I could just keep talking about all of this with both of you.
Would love to. Yeah. Thank you so much, Claire and Dara.
Thank you so much. This conversation has been recorded, so if anyone here wants to share it with someone, it should be coming out in an email tomorrow. And just thank you so much. Thank you to Reimagine for always holding space for these really important conversations.
Thank you for another wonderful conversation. That was fantastic. And I just wanted to answer the question in the chat. I will also, when we send out the email with the recording, we'll also include all the links. And I also just wanted to do a little shout out for Claire's new podcast on Lemonada, which I'll put the link in and we'll share it out too. But
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So that's another resource. But yeah, and I put in a link for our upcoming holding space in November with Dr. Nahid Jasani. So it should be another great conversation.
Thanks to everyone who was here today too. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.